Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to the third Wednesday webinar. I'm your host, Mohammed Hamad, and today we got a special guest, Dan Levy. Dan is a founder of Storyline. He's a messaging and positioning consultant. Um, He's got quite an interesting background. I've known him for years, and he's amazing at what he does. And I'm going to let him tell you all about where he's been in the last while and his expertise.
All right. Thank you, Mo. So good to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. As Mo said, I'm founder of Storyline. Spent the last 15 years or so working across content, communications, and product marketing for mostly B2B technology companies. And what I've learned through all those experiences is that in the age of AI-powered everything, where pretty much everybody just sounds the same these days, having a great product or service or mission just isn't enough anymore. And to compete for attention or for actual customers, really what you need is a bold and differentiated story that communicates what you do, what you think, and why it matters to the right people right now. So I call that your strategic story. It's all about bringing your unique point of view to market. And that story needs to be original. It needs to be urgent. It needs to resonate emotionally with people. And if you find the right story and if you craft it right and bring it to market, it really becomes the connective tissue that unites every part of your business, from product to HR, ultimately to your marketing and sales.
Absolutely. I mean, these days, having a strong story is something that everybody wants. Everybody talks about storytelling, crafting their story, honing in on their messaging. It's core to any organization's branding, and it really informs how you communicate, your visual style, your aesthetic, your vibe, and how you put yourself across on all your digital channels. Now, this I've always found in my career and working in marketing and running Third Wonder for the last decade or so is a lot harder than most people think, but there's a sense of simplicity around it as well. Like if you really distill it down, there is a core central truth to it. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to understand from you, how do you go about crafting a story? Like, what are the building blocks? What is the core pieces of a strategic story?
Yeah, I love that you use the word distill, because to me, like, it's all about distillation, right? It's all about distilling your company strategy, your brand into this really clear and crisp story that you can actually bring to market, right? Positioning is fundamental. That's like what you do. Strategy is obviously your company plan. But when it comes to kind of going to market, you need something really tangible and actionable. That then can translate into your website messaging, your PR, your content marketing, your demand gen. So I really see like the strategic story as the fuel for everything. Your whole really go-to-market engine. And before we get to sort of the crafting of the story, let me just give you an example off the bat, because I know that like this stuff could be really abstract, right? Like brand, strategy, story, like it means a lot of different things to a lot of people.
Yes.
So let me just give you an example to sort of anchor it in a real customer story. So I've been working with this great company in the K through 12 education technology space. So what they do is actually a little bit niche. They've got a series of products for managing what's sometimes called student activity funds. These are payments and fees for school activities that aren't part of the core curriculum. So think of like field trips, athletic events, uniforms, yearbooks, fundraisers. They've been around for almost 30 years, and they've acquired lots of different companies and their products along the way. So it came to me looking for this overarching story that ties everything together and help them kind of rev up their go-to-market engine as they look to expand into new markets where they don't have a footprint right now. So the first step here was to solidify their positioning. Right? Since student activity fund management is a bit of a mouthful and not actually that well defined or understood even within their space. We first kind of reposition them around this idea of being a school finance platform, and that communicated the fact that they're not just about fund management; they're about payments and accounting and reporting and auditing and bringing all this stuff together into one unified platform. So that was sort of the first step. But like, that's their positioning. What's the actual story, right? What's the story that they're bringing to market that's actually going to pull people in and resonate more emotionally? So what we discovered is that the folks that they're selling to are public school district finance teams. So this is like the CFO and their team at a mid-size or even really large public school district in North America. And these folks, really busy. There's a lot of increased scrutiny around funding, and public school funding is really being cut for various reasons. Some of them political, some just sort of coming out of COVID. A lot of those grants and temporary funding has dried up. And what we found is that these folks have a real blind spot around this level of public school funds, right? They've got these really big, expensive ERP platforms to manage their finances at the district level, which actually accounts for the majority of their budgets. But these student level activity fees and funds, which actually sometimes like take the form of literal like cash put in a Ziploc bag and given to a teacher or to the principal, these are largely unaccounted for. And while that may seem like small potatoes, these funds across a district could actually add up to hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. And so the question was like, what happens if those go missing, right? That could be through fraud or just like mismanagement and poor accounting because they don't have visibility over this, student level and school level funds. And so, this district, if this happens, gets exposed to some real reputational risk, some real auditing risk at the government level. And so the story that we crafted here was all around this idea of the school finance blind spot, right? District finance teams have this blind spot, and it's actually more critical than they actually think. And they need a purpose-built solution for eliminating this blind spot. And so that became a story that kind of unified their go-to-market and then became the basis for more tactical messaging, across their website, across their sales decks, and everything else.
So I just wanted to kind of roll back a little bit and have a little bit of clarity. When people talk about storytelling, they think it is the story of the organization, the backstory, the origin story, how it came to be and what is it trying to do, whether it's revolutionize this or democratize that and all of that. From what I'm hearing from this example here, it's not quite that. It's the story about what they're actually doing and how they help their customers or their clients. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think you're talking about the founder story, and the founder story could be a really useful tool with like very early stage startups, especially when raising money. But when it comes to actual go to market, that founding story, it just doesn't scale, right? And isn't necessarily relevant to your customers. And so the story that I'm talking about, this overarching strategic story, is really it's like you said, it's about like what you do, but it's also more pointedly about like your point of view on your market space and the problem space. So it's a bit more of a customer and problem focused story and a market focused story than a story that's about you and your history and your team.
Okay, that's good to know because most people that I know, when they think of storytelling, they think about the journey of the founders of the organization and all of that, and this is more the story of why someone should care. The actual customer, the client who is going to be purchasing or engaging with the organization, why should they care? And that's the tactical side of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and that story, when the founder is talking, the CEO is talking, like, obviously that's if you could connect that larger story to their origin story, that's great, right? But again, that is very tactical. That's very channel specific. That's the messaging piece, right? You might have your founder messaging, but the larger overarching story needs to be a little bit bigger than that and rooted in your problem space and your insight into the market rather than your origin story.
Okay, so in saying that, how do you craft your story? Like, how do you go back to, ground level and start from scratch? What are the key components, or what are the ways that you go about understanding the organization and their product and their product market fit to craft that narrative that will connect with the audience that it's intended for?
Yeah, so before you craft your story, you have to find the story, right? You have to uncover your story. And I started my career as a journalist. I got a master's degree at Boston University and covered the 2008 presidential election and financial crisis in DC. So what I learned there were these fundamentals of quickly finding your unique and compelling angle on a particular topic, or in this case, a particular market, through essentially research and reporting. So when it comes to finding your storyline or your strategic story as a business, I take a similar approach and focus on a few key inputs. The first is really in-depth one-on-one interviews with key stakeholders across the company. So that starts with the CEO and the founding team, but it also, in especially larger organizations, includes the sales leader, right, who's talking to customers or potential customers every day, the product leader who owns the product vision and product roadmap, and ideally like a customer success leader, someone who's really in the trenches with customers. And notice I said, one-on-one interviews there. So I know that there are some consultants who do these very expensive hours or even days-long workshops with a cross-section of company leaders. From my experience, these workshops tend to end up, deferring to the loudest and most powerful person in the room, which is usually the CEO or the founder. And that's, the CEO and founder's vision and perspective is in many cases, the primary one. But when you do these one-on-one interviews with different stakeholders, you get a much broader perspective. And you actually have the secondary benefit is that, I can go back to the CEO and say, hey, your team's not aligned, right? Or here's where the misalignment or misunderstanding is around the fundamental story. So that's sort of the first input is these kind of, one-on-one interviews with key internal stakeholders. I also believe in external inputs though, right? And that could be, just doing, some competitive research, some market research, understanding the broader, context that your company lives in. Right, analyst reports are great for this, industry reports, and just looking at what competitors are out there saying and doing, because the name of the game here is differentiation. So it's really important to understand what your competitors or your alternatives solutions, the alternatives to your solution are out there saying, so that you can find your unique angle. And then finally is the customer side. So, lots of people out there talking about the importance of talking to actual customers or prospective customers to understand like the key pain points and aha moments across the customer journey. That's all super important. There's another kind of more like very pragmatic side to talking to customers is like uncovering their actual words, right? It's really useful to hear the terms and the words and the phrases that they're using to describe both your company and the broader problem that they're looking to solve. So uncovering the voice of the customer could be a really important input, especially when it comes down to actually crafting the story.
That's super interesting because, there's so many moving parts and there's so many people's opinions and or perspectives being shared in this exercise. You've got the founders and the founding team, you've got the staff, you've got staff members, let's say in sales and marketing that are the closest to the customers. And then there's the customers. How do you align all of those perspectives to create a story that is, one, unique, or highly connected and representative of all of those views without having a situation where it gets very confusing, or as the old saying goes, either it's an elephant or a camel, or we're designed by committee where, nobody knows what's happening. Like how do you distill it down and you focus it is a huge one.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm trying to avoid by not doing these kind of big workshops because that often does result in groupthink and a bit of a watered down story that is I guess the kind of the lowest common denominator, or what consensus delivers by getting these different perspectives and then sort of triangulating to come up with this very pointed and unique angle. You're going to get to something that's much more bold and differentiated and specific than by just trying to come up with like, okay, they said this, let's meet somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Now that you have, let's say, all this information and you've got all these perspectives and you've got these words that clients talk about, you've got the founder story and their input. How how do you distill it down? How do you get rid of the jargon? How do you move into a space where there's clarity, where there's a refined message that is one for the prospective client, instinctually gives that aha moment as you go through it.
Yeah. So now we're talking about the sort of bread and butter storytelling, right? Crafting the story. So like you said, like there's so many books out there and frameworks around storytelling, right? My friend Pep Laya, the CEO of WUNDER, likes to joke that when people talk about storytelling for business, it's all like something Joseph Campbell, right? we've all heard like the hero's journey, right? This idea of making your customer the hero. I kind of want to call BS on that.
Okay.
First off, but when I posted on this on LinkedIn recently, and my former CMO and now client Ruth Zive, said like, there's nothing heroic about buying software, right? So like everybody relax a little bit with like the really grandiose hero's journey idea. But secondly, like I just believe that there's just no one size fits all approach to storytelling, right? So yes, the hero's journey might work for certain products. But from my experience when working, mostly with, within the enterprise, where there's multiple buyers, where, there's maybe multiple products, that's just too simplistic a framework. So with the caveat that I don't think there's any one size fits all, I will share a framework that I've used for many of my clients for crafting that overall strategic story. So again, that overall story that ultimately distills your positioning and forms the blueprint for the rest of your messaging, the rest of your content. And so I call this framework, and it's sort of adapted from some tried and true old school copywriting frameworks with a bit of a modern spin on it. I call it CPSV, and I did go to my AI friend and say, can you come up with like a fun backronym for this? And the best it came up with was Cheese Pizza Safety Vest.
Okay.
Which I thought was kind of fun, but really it stands for context, problem, solution, and vision. So starting with context, this is really what roots your story in the here and now, right? It establishes the market that you're playing in, what's happening in the broader industry, the broader world, that makes your story urgent and relevant. And so with that school finance blind spot example I gave earlier, here's where we would talk about how this blind spot is actually happening at the worst possible moment for public school districts, right? Like I said, funding is declining and scrutiny is rising. And so by anchoring in the context, we also show a little bit of empathy for the buyer, that we know what's happening in the larger market, and being sold more software is probably not what you want to hear right now. But here's why, kind of planting the flag about like, we understand your context, hear us out. Next, the P is for problem. Here is where you really define, articulate, distill the customer's problem in clear, specific, and emotionally resonant terms. So the more you can kind of agitate the buyer's pain, the better. And so in that school finance example, like here is where we get really specific about the problem of in most public schools these days, you literally have like a school bookkeeper stuffing cash into a Ziploc and taking it to the bank like during their lunch hour, right? It's really, really old school, and obviously does not lend itself to good accounting and auditing practices. I'm working with another company in the sustainability reporting space. Context-wise, this is actually super interesting because they're facing a lot of tailwinds or headwinds, I should say, just because of the overall backlash against, ESG and DEI and sustainability. And so context-wise, we want to acknowledge that up front. Problem-wise, we want to talk about the fact that sustainability reporting is actually really, really complex, right? It involves lots of quantitative data, qualitative data. It's not just about climate risks, but also cybersecurity, also employee safety, supply chain disruptions, and get really, really specific about the problem so that we can go into the solution, which is just really clear articulation of what you do, right? That's where you bring in that core positioning work that you've hopefully done early on to anchor your solution in some sort of category and explain in just clear terms what it is you actually do. And then that brings us to the V, the vision. And here is again where I think story work differs from core positioning work. Positioning is all about the here and now. It's about what your product does right now. Vision is about where you're going and sort of the larger why behind your company and behind your brand. And I do believe that this is important and something that not just investors care about and your team cares about, but also potential customers, right? Especially if they're buying a complex enterprise software. Maybe there's multi-year contracts involved. Maybe it's a fintech solution where you're, as a small business owner, going to be putting your money for the foreseeable future. Like, you don't want to reevaluate this every month or every year even. So by communicating your larger vision, you're both, I think, resonating more emotionally with people, but also ensuring them that you're thinking long term here. And so, in the school finance example, this is where we talk about this idea of empowering everybody in the school community, right? From your bookkeeper to your principal to teachers to parents, to ultimately create a more financially responsible school for students, right? Financially responsible schools ultimately make successful students. In the sustainability reporting software example, this is where we talk about this idea of really elevating the practice of sustainability reporting to the level of financial reporting, which everybody knows is mission critical. Everybody knows needs its own purpose-built tools. And ultimately, with this software, you are empowering everyone in your company to build a more sustainable business, kind of capital S sustainable business. So ending on that note of vision is both about inspiration and also about anchoring in the bigger why or mission behind the company.
I see that the flow of the process is the inverse of, let's say, Simon Sinek's start with why. And which is interesting, but I do connect with really connecting with the context and the problem first, and the vision comes in later, because that's the thing that propels you forward, as opposed to starting with the why. Because if you don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it, then then the bigger vision doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, I like to say, start with what it is you actually do, and then lead them towards the why. Because like you said, if you just start with sort of a more of a generic why, you've kind of lost them. If you start with the what, and also the now, right, that context and that problem, you're getting their attention right away, and at least you're acknowledging the bigger context that they're playing in right off the bat.
Absolutely. I want to encourage everybody, if they do have any questions, to throw them in the chat. We're going to be answering some questions soon enough. But now that we've established the crafting of the story and finding the story, how do you bring the story to market? That's the key part. Once you get all of that, how do you take it to the public?
Yeah, that's sort of the big one. Operationalizing that story across your business, is the key to an actual successful story, right? If it just dies in a messaging doc, then what's the point of the exercise? So from a go-to-market perspective, I actually recommend focusing your initial energy on two flagship assets, your pitch and your homepage. So depending on your company stage, your pitch can take the form of a sales deck or an investor deck, or even maybe an investor brief or memo. But what's important to note is that it's not just a collection of slides, right? It's a fully fleshed out talk track to make sure that the right story is being told in the right order in a consistent way. And by kind of focusing on your pitch first, you're actually able to bring your story, to market in a really tangible way, putting it in front of actual customers, actual prospects, maybe actual investors, and getting that, face-to-face feedback so that you can validate the story and iterate if you have to. That's where I usually like to start. The second is the homepage. There's I think lots of talk these days about the website being dead and AI search, for example, being the new discovery. We may be heading in that direction. I don't think that you're going to be getting tons of traffic, expecting your homepage or your website to be this inbound machine anymore. But I think it does remain the front door to your business, and the first place where a prospect or a customer or media or an investor look, or a potential employee looks to understand who you are, what you do, and what you stand for. So getting that story, that strategic story, front and center on your homepage, I think is really key to putting a stake in the ground. And again, getting feedback on that story, testing that story as quickly as possible. And then once you've got the story and you've got those initial, flagship assets in place, you'll find that everything downstream just happens much faster and much more effectively. Your PR, your marketing campaigns, your sales plays, even your customer success framework, all need to ladder up. Here, and I have a little visual here. This all ladders up to that core strategic story. So as you can see, that strategic story really becomes like the soul of your business and that fuel for your entire go-to-market strategy.
Okay. We've got a question from our guests, and coming in from Sam. Let's see. Sam is asking, in this age where you have 3 seconds to capture the audience's attention, what tips can you share so the story is not compromised?
So again, I come back to anchoring, in the context and your unique insights and your unique point of view on the market. So, I think by putting that front and center, you're not only, have a hook to pull people in that's original, that's bold, that's compelling, but you've really started this larger conversation around, this market space that you're in, your point of view, that then very quickly leads them into the what you do and your features and your benefits and all that good stuff. And I'm thinking here in the context of a homepage, because we talk about 3 seconds to capture. I imagine that's what you're talking about. Like, you land on a page, how do you get the audience's attention? But again, lean into that point of view, be confident in your point of view, and don't let somebody tell you that we should be starting with just customer logos, or we should be starting with something, some sort of bland jargon around how you drive revenue and supercharge blah 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 blah, right? A unique point of view is going to capture the right people's attention right away.
Yeah, I think a lot of the homepage, first thing you see messaging, which really loses people, is the very a very obtuse sort of messaging. It's like, we empower visionaries to be empowered to vision kind of situation, and coming back to what you were talking about in terms of context and problem, I feel like that should be front and center to make sure that right off the bat, first 3 seconds, exactly who you are in terms of context and what you're trying to do in terms of, vis-a-vis themselves, and they see themselves in that. The vision and the visionary part comes in later, and features and product also come in later. The hook needs to drive to the next 2 pieces.
Yeah, or maybe they don't see themselves, and that's okay too, right? So having a clear point of view, that's maybe a little bit bold, maybe a little bit contrarian or unexpected. Again, brings in the right people from the get-go, and it also tells others who aren't the right fit, that maybe they should look elsewhere. And I think disqualifying people in some ways is just as important as qualifying them.
We got another question from Tara, who asks, has storytelling changed since the increase in use of AI?
I think it's just become more important. Like, the differentiation piece has become so much more important, because AI, I mean, look, it's a great tool, and absolutely, I think when it comes to bringing your story to market, really at all points, I think it could be a great research tool in finding the story. I think it can be a great tool to help you craft the story, and certainly to take that core story and bring it to market and translate that to all different sorts of assets. But to get to that, unique storyline, that unique angle, that takes real, human conversation, and I think real human insights. And then that becomes the input into your AI to go and take that story and proliferate it in a number of ways. But AI, I think we've all, just by looking at LinkedIn, we can all agree, it's made everybody sound the same. People were already sounding the same, like you said, with those jargon and those buzzwords. Now the differentiation is even more important, because everybody could use AI to get to good enough. But to really differentiate, you need to hone in on something really, really unique and really grounded, in that context and in that unique point of view that only you have, right? We all still have our own point of views, right? Wrong or right, they're ours, and I think that's one thing that AI can't take away from us.
Yeah, in a previous webinar, I spoke to Joelle Irvine, a AI consultant, about how to use AI to do the research and to ingest large amounts of, let's say, customer data and reviews and internal sales calls and all of that to really kind of hone in on the buyer journey and the messaging and find patterns of how to pull that out to use to craft a story or to create a marketing strategy.
Yeah, fantastic tool, right? Yeah, fantastic tool for all that stuff.
Yeah.
I recently, like I said, I started my career in journalism, and I actually started as an editor. So in a way, like, it makes me really excited as an editor because now I have this sort of army of AI writers, right? That could do a lot of the heavy lifting, but you still need this really tasteful, experienced, insightful editor to prompt the AI, to give it feedback, to say things like, okay, this was pretty good, but like, this sounds way too much like AI. That's one of my favorite prompts, by the way. Like, write this with AI, but make it not sound like AI, right? And use these inputs, in terms of the messaging and the positioning and the core story, right? So if you have these core elements of the story, then there's so many different ways that you can take that core story and translate that into all sorts of really great deliverables, using AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is maybe another discussion to be had about storytelling with AI and how to use AI to craft content and craft content in general. In saying that, we are at time. I wanted to invite everybody to connect with Dan. You can find him on LinkedIn, and that's his website over here, founder of Storyline. And click that button over there, testing this out. Right there on your screen, that'll take you to his LinkedIn page, and you can follow him and his insights on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and drop me a DM if you found this conversation helpful, insightful, or not. It'd be great to hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan, so much for joining us this month. This was an awesome chat. There's so many insights over here, and looking forward to maybe another one coming up. For everybody else, thank you for joining us this month, and stay tuned for the recording of this webinar and more to come.
Amazing. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, everyone.